Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Fraad on Capitalism Hits Home, an interpersonal update. This is a show about the intersection of capitalism, class, and our personal lives. On to the current cover-up. The flight logs, as I said before, for the Lolita Express were subpoenaed, but they have somehow disappeared. How very convenient. The names have never been revealed. The names of many of his contacts were revealed when the safe in Epstein's $71 million mansion was broken into. But those names have not been enumerated. There's even a lawsuit that someone has started, anonymously, of course, saying that to reveal those names might implicate innocent people. Might implicate guilty ones, too. Who knows? Wealthy and connected rapists like Alan Dershowitz of Harvard, and Bill Clinton, our ex-president, and Trump, our current president, are named by accusers, but they minimize their role and get away with it. It's a cover-up. The New York Times revealed that Epstein got out of the Palm County Jail in 2009, after, of course, he had that very light tap on the wrist of 13 months, where he could leave whenever he wanted to, and he used his money to buy an image as a benefactor, a forward-looking scientific philanthropist. He bought journalists to sing his praises. In reputable journals like Forbes, like the National Review, which is less reputable but is thought to be, and even the Huffington Post. The prestigious Financial Times included in its website an interview with Jeffrey Epstein by Dylan Love, commending Epstein as, quote, someone who used his vast resources towards beneficial ends. The Financial Times didn't mention the beneficial end of a cover-up of sex crimes or buying positive coverage. They also omitted to mention that this very beneficial Epstein was a registered sex offender in Florida. Epstein's generous donations to scientific research bought a cover-up of silence. If we go to a particularly prestigious institution, MIT, we can look at MIT's media labs. New documents show that the MIT Media Lab was aware of Epstein's status as a sex offender and that he directly contributed to the lab in far greater amounts than MIT revealed. The MIT Media Lab, which has been embroiled in a scandal over accepting donations from Epstein, had a very deep fundraising relationship with Epstein. Dozens of pages of emails and other documents obtained by Ronan Farrow and published in The New Yorker reveal that although Epstein was listed as disqualified as a donor on the official donor list of MIT, the Media Lab continued to accept his generous donations and consulted him about how they should use the funds. By making his contributions anonymous, they avoided the full extent publicly and even within the university. Perhaps, and most notably, Epstein appeared to serve as an intermediary between the rich benefactors that the Media Lab wanted to tap up and Epstein, because these were his friends who he cultivated with sexual favors, as we mentioned. And some of those friends are Leon Black, who, according to the records, accounts, was credited to giving $7.5 million to MIT in donations. He also got $2 million from Bill Gates, as well as another $5.5 million Epstein arranged from Leon Black. They were gifts made at Epstein's behest, and as we know, Epstein had a little something on all these men. The effort to conceal Epstein's contributions was so known that some in the staff of the lab's director, Joey Ito, referred to Epstein as Voldemort, he who should not be named. The financial entanglements revealed goes well beyond, of course, what was described in public statements, either by MIT or by Ito of the Media Lab. The university said it had received $800,000 from Epstein's foundations in the course of 20 years and has so apologized for accepting that amount. In a statement last month, MIT's president, Raphael Reif, wrote, quote, "With hindsight, we recognize with shame and distress that we allowed MIT to contribute to the elevation of Epstein's reputation, which in turn served to distract from his horrifying acts. No apology can do that." Reif pledged to donate the funds to a charity to help victims of sexual abuse. On Wednesday, Ito disclosed that in addition to all the other millions, he got a personal gift in gratitude from Epstein, in gratitude for his connections. He got $1.2 million to invest personally in his own personal investment account. In addition to the $525,000 that Ito acknowledged Epstein donated to his lab, a spokesman for MIT said the university is looking into the facts around these gifts because there are millions in gifts that were anonymous. They knew that Epstein had pleaded guilty. Memos to the lab employees from Ito, its director, were never mention Jeffrey Epstein's gifts. 1. Zuckerman was an employer who quit over this because he felt it was disgraceful that they accepted Epstein's money. And while he was arguing with them, Ito wrote a note that said, "We have glass-walled officers. If anyone sees Zuckerman walking towards us while I am meeting with Jeffrey Epstein, head him off. No mention should be made of this." Now, the letters that went back and forth between Ito and Epstein included suggestions from Ito to Epstein, like, "Could you top your gift off another $100,000? I want another faculty position." This was in 2014, long after the crimes were known. And Epstein replied, "Yes." Forwarding the response to a member of his staff, Ito said, "Make sure this gift gets accounted for as anonymous." Peter Cohen, who's now at Brown University, the MIT Media Lab's director, said, "Remember, Jeffrey money has to be anonymous." This memo also informed their other fundraising colleagues. "Please be aware when Epstein visits, he cannot go anywhere without his 2 female assistants. Epstein was a sex addict and always needed women nearby, women he could rape, although not during the interview." How very discreet. Senior Swenson, one of the women involved, and several other current MIT Media Lab employees expressed disapproval and discomfort with Epstein's relationship to that lab. In August, 2 researchers, including Zuckerman, who I named, resigned in protest. In a Medium protest, Medium is on the internet, Zuckerman wrote that MIT has violated its own values so clearly in working with Epstein and disguising that relationship that he could no longer stay. He directed Swenson to seek representation in a whistleblower group, which she did, and she went public, exposing this. Ito resigned when it was clear that Ronan Farrow had this information and the whistleblower knew what was going on. Whistleblowers put themselves in danger, so it is very courageous to do that, the way Julie Brown did, in a sense, and so many others have. Questions about when to accept money from wealthy figures accused of misconduct have always been rather delicate. Before his conviction, his final conviction, or at least his final jailing, Epstein gave all sorts of money, including at the $6.5 million donation to Harvard. And after the second arrest, Harvard reiterated that they would not take any Epstein money, but of course they did. And the Media Lab continued to accept money. When such donations come to light, institutions have to respond to the systemic corruption that is exposed in our vulture capitalism. The funds have been often spent, and the tax deductions have all been taken by the donors. But the widespread revelations about Epstein's sexual misconduct, reported by Julie Brown courageously in the Miami Herald, made it very clear that Epstein knew how to work the system. He blackmailed billionaires and then used their connections and his own accumulated monies to ingratiate himself at elite institutions as a philanthropist and to disguise his alleged predations. What made this possible? What are the class dynamics here? We've talked about the gender dynamics. What are the class dynamics? Well, most of the girls came from severely disadvantaged places. They were either foster kids on their own with no money, or girls who were homeless or near homeless. Can you imagine? They're offered a job by his recruiter, Ghislaine Maxwell, and others, where they'll make a lot of money, and if he likes them, he'll help them with their education. And they walk into a mansion that's the biggest in Manhattan or Florida, and they're utterly cowed and afraid, and they allow themselves to be used sexually. Then when they're used sexually, they're ashamed of what their need for money involved them in. So they don't even want to reveal it. They're covered with shame, and of course, it's the transferred shame from their predators. They also feel, who will believe me? I'm poor, and I'm nobody, and this man has vast wealth, and so do the other men he's allowing to rape me. One thing is clear: money talks. This is a system in which the employer has the power to destroy a whole town because it closes a factory, where the employer decides what you produce, when you produce it, and how much you get. And you can sometimes strike, which costs you money and is very difficult. But it's the employer who's in charge. And people who have money get away with crimes. They have the best lawyers. In fact, it was a really valiant and courageous lawyer, Julie Brown, as I said, who exposed Epstein in the first place, and Alan Dershowitz used his muscle as Harvard professor of law emeritus to lose her the Pulitzer Prize she deserved. Money talks, but sometimes the media are silent, and sometimes their silence is interrupted. Epstein's crimes were reported. The flight logs, as I said, weren't. Who are these rich, connected men who flew to Orgy Island and got to rape girls? Their names are revealed on the flight logs, but we don't know. What happened around the cover-up of Epstein's death? At first it was called an apparent suicide because they weren't so sure. Now it's declared as a suicide. The circumstances are very interesting. It happened 2 days after the safe was broken and the names were potentially revealed, though they haven't been. Jeffrey Epstein was in a special cell for suicide watch. He had ostensibly tried to commit suicide a couple of weeks earlier. The rules for suicide attempts are that after someone has attempted suicide, they need to be on suicide watch. They need a cellmate at all times, so they're never alone in their cell. There are cameras positioned outside their cells. There are guards who are supposed to guard them and check on them every half hour. Well, what happened? The warden, who is an employee of Barr, our Attorney General, and Trump's dear buddy, is responsible for that warden. That warden transferred the cellmate out, defying protocol on suicide watch, so that Epstein was alone in his cell. The reports of the inmates to CBS about the screaming and yelling they heard from Epstein's cell on the night of his death were reported only once on CBS. You can find it on Google, but it wasn't followed up. How interesting. The 2 guards fell asleep, both of them, for the same 3 hours during which this ostensible suicide took place. No toxicology reports were made on any substances that might have been responsible for 2 guards, even though they were both on overtime, it's true, but falling asleep for the same 3 hours? At first, when the report came out from the autopsy, it said the injuries were commensurate with strangulation, as well as possibly with suicide. Why wasn't that discussed? Why didn't they release the thousands of documents from Epstein's mansion? And we should go back to the other, really. Why were the guards disciplined for falling asleep? They were suspended, but not for long. And the warden got off scot-free. Isn't that interesting? He was an employee of Barr, because the Metropolitan Correction Center is under federal jurisdiction. Barr, who got Jeffrey Epstein started, whose father got him started as a math and science teacher at Dalton High School when he didn't even have a college degree. I wonder what he did to ingratiate himself. At any rate, Barr is his employer, and the warden got off tax-free The guards' toxicology reports don't exist. They weren't even tested. The other inmates who heard screaming and yelling from his cell are discounted. The ambiguous autopsy report is not discussed. Now, Jeffrey Epstein was considered a suicide. Only Epstein's lawyers say publicly they don't believe it for a minute. He wasn't depressed. They had a new strategy for his winning. They had seen him within the day before, and they thought that they could win and free him. And they are suing. Now, of course, they probably want to sue because then they're still paid by his estate. But also, they may have something here. The circumstances are quite compromised. You wonder, what happened here? Ghislaine Maxwell can't be traced. And that was his primary accomplice. She's, quote, disappeared, even though she has a mail drop in Florida. They could find bin Laden, but they can't find Ghislaine Maxwell. Maybe she, quote, committed suicide too. Or maybe they don't want to find her. In any case, where is she? She would be in a position to give ample evidence. Vulture capitalists can buy what they need. In a society, capitalism is known as this way of allocating goods and services. The people who have the money get it, and if there's a scarcity, it costs more, and they get it because they can pay more. It's not rationing for the people who need it. In Cuba, milk is rationed, so children have a right to get it first. Not here. If milk were that scarce as it is in Cuba, it would just cost a lot, and who cares if poor kids died? But that's capitalism, and the men who hold billions like these men did, like Epstein's founder and patron Wexner, like Leon Black of Apollo Global Management, like Jess Staley, now of Barclays, who was the head of of Morgan Chase, and their flunkies, really, who run Harvard and MIT and Brown University, the prestigious elite who want money, as well as the other universities, like British Columbia University or Arizona University, can be paid, and their reputations depend on the money they get. One becomes the president of a university not because of one's scholarship, but because a person raises money. And the more money you raise, the higher your position. Doesn't that invite corruption? So what we're seeing is a combination of distorted, inhumane gender practices that deny men their feelings and the whole range of experiences that they could have in life, and deny women knowledge about and value to their own personal value as women and people rather than sex objects, and give to wealthy men the right to buy women's flesh and then the right to cover it up when they're discovered. So Epstein brings together capitalist predation and gender perversion in our class system. It has fascinated me, and it's fascinated many others. And now that they have conveniently reported on Epstein's ostensible suicide, it's disappearing. We should remember it, because we can change this system. It's up to us. That's all for today. Thank you for listening. This episode has been brought to you by Democracy at Work. Please support our work. Visit our website at democracyatwork.info.